What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the fighting game tutorial series, we're going to be going over installs, powered up states, and buffs part 2. This episode is where we are actually going to go over the damage modifiers and hit stun modifiers for when we're in our install. So let's go and load up a level. I decided to change to versus mode because there was actually a lot going on in practice mode that was making it not as clear of a demo. So here I am in my versus mode, and I'm going to go to my mutant BP. You can see all of my install variables here, and essentially what's going to happen is we're going to trigger a command that is going to play an install animation. Once that is done, we will be in our install state. Our install will be active. Once it is active, the total install duration is used to determine how long this install state is active for. And once that time runs out, in this case 15 seconds, we're going to reset and exit the install state. Now, let's take a look at the output log down here. So when I am going to attack my opponent, we are going to see the damage and the number of stun frames in the log. Just know that the damage install modifier is 2.5 and the hit stun install modifier is 2.0. So close out of that, and we'll open this back up. Alright, so here we go. Let's go ahead and give ourselves super meter so that we can enter our install state like this. And now when we attack our opponent, we should see logs that say the character is taking damage for 0.25 points, which is 25% of their health. And the character is stunned for 120 frames. Now, right now my install is active, so I'm doing extra damage with all my attacks. At this point, my install should be inactive, and we can figure this out. Is install active? You can see my install is no longer active. So if I am to attack my opponent again, these values change quite a bit. So you can see in the first example, with the install, my damage is multiplied by 2.5, and my stun is multiplied by 2, because this is my install damage and stun, and this is my regular damage and stun for that move. Likewise, this was my damage and stun for my launcher move during the install, and this was my damage and stun for my launcher move during no install. So long story short, we are increasing our damage and stun when the install state is active. That's what we want to be covering today. Before we hop into this episode, if you want to get caught up in the series, you can check out this playlist up here in the top right corner to check out every single episode of the fighting game tutorial series, see how we've come from a basic project all the way to this point. Alternatively, if you don't care about that and you only care about your installs, I will link you to the first episode of installs, the previous episode in the series right here, because that's important so that you know how to set up the logic for today's episode. With that out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. Now, this is a code and blueprint tutorial series. We're going to start in the code today. So I'm going to my code, and I'm going to go to my fighter template character.h, and I want to scroll down to where we make our variables, and specifically I want to make a variable for our damage install modifier and our stun install modifier. So I've made two float variables. 1, damage install modifier. 2, hit stun install modifier. I did call it hit stun install modifier, not block stun install modifier, not just stun install modifier, because this is only going to affect our hit stun, not our block stun, but you could have it affect both. So if you want, I recommend calling it stun install modifier. Regardless though, we need to make two floats. Both of them are going to be U property so that we can access them in the blueprint. So specifically we need to make them U property, edit anywhere, blueprint read write. And I've given them a category of install so that it's easier to find them. And then we have another U property, edit anywhere, blueprint read write with a category of install. Once you make these variables, we can go up to the fighter template character.cpp and scroll down in our constructor where we set all the default values for our variables, and let's set these values up. So I've set them right here. Damage install modifier is 2.5 F and hit stun install modifier is 2.0 F. These are arbitrary values. These are the values I picked. You can change them to fit your game with whatever values you want. Additionally, you can change them per character with the way we set this up now. So if you want certain characters that have more damage during their install or more stun, you could do it this way. If you don't, you could make these constant values and all characters would share that value and use that value, but that is up to you. For me, right now, I'm just using these two values. Now, once you have that set up, we are good to go here. Alright, so I am going to go to my blueprints, and specifically I'm going to go to my hitbox actor BP. This is where we pass along the damage values from our hitbox to the character and call take damage. And here I've added some logic that we're going to cover today, and of course we'll clean this up and make it look nicer, but I've just separated it for demonstration purposes right now. This is our event check collision, and so essentially we're going to determine if the hitbox is overlapping with a character and then deal damage to them if it is a strike hitbox. So we have a lot of logic in here from other episodes, other points, but at the end of this logic, this is where we check to see what type of hitbox it is. Projectiles are handled down below. Right now we're only worried about our strike hitboxes. We're not even worried about throw hitboxes because the damage on throw can be implemented when the throw finishes or when the actual grab lands. That's of course fine too, and we have support throughout the series for that, so I'm not going to go into that right now. Basically, we're just dealing with a simple strike hitbox scenario here. So for this, we have our character, which is essentially the character that was hit by this hitbox. And we were calling take damage on them, and we were passing along the data from the hitbox data structure that we have. However, we can multiply our damage modifier and our hit stun modifier by the values on this hitbox and then pass them into take damage so that if the character that created this hitbox is in their install, it does more damage and more stun. So let's look at an example of this. So first things first, we need to grab our hitbox owner because this is the owner of the hitbox. It's not the same as the character that is taking damage. The hitbox belongs to another character. That's why this character is taking damage. You can't hurt yourself with your own hitbox. Luckily, at the very start of the event, we've already figured this out. So in check collision, we get the owner, cast it to the fire template character, and then set the hitbox owner. So going back over now, we have our hitbox owner. We want to grab the damage install modifier off of the hitbox owner. So I'm going to drag off the hitbox owner, and I'm going to get our variable that we made, damage install modifier. Now, only if the install is active do we want to do this, because otherwise we just want to use the regular damage that comes from the hitbox like we have up to this point in the series. So we can drag off the hitbox owner and also check if the install is active. Get is install active. Now remember, this damage install modifier is a modifier. It's exactly that. It is not the actual damage that is going to be done to the character. It's a modifier of the existing damage. We need to take our modifier and multiply. So float times float. Multiply it by the hitbox damage, which we have down here. Hitbox data, hitbox damage. That's what we were passing into take damage previously, the damage amount. And so whatever we were passing into damage amount, we want to pass into our multiply here. Then we only want to use this value, this multiplied result, if the install is active. You could either use a branch or a select to get this done. I think we're going to use a select this time. So we're selecting between two floats, the unmodified damage and the install modified damage. So I'm going to right click and type select float. The way this works is based off of a boolean that we give it, it will use either a value or b value. So a value is the multiplication. Damage install modifier times our hitbox damage is a, because we only want to do this if is install active. So we're going to pass is install active into pick a. Then we are going to drag our hitbox data, hitbox damage, directly into the b. And we have these nodes here. Now what we have to do is use the return value and pass that into the take damage call right here. Now, I'm already doing this. That's what you see on my screen right here. We just remade it, but this is exactly the same as we just made. You'll see the result, the return value of this is going into the take damage. Now, the other case is the hit stun. So we want to do the same process. We're going to grab the hit stun install modifier right here. And we're going to do multiply, but we want to do int times float. because the hit stun is in number of frames, which is an integer. So we're going to pass our hitbox data hit stun frames into the integer part of this multiplication. Then we're going to drag off of the multiply because we have to convert it to an integer since we're selecting an integer. And we're going to say truncate. Essentially, this will remove any decimal places in terms of number of stun frames. So if you ended up with like 8.5 frames that the character is hit stun for, it's going to change it to just 8 frames. This is perfectly fine in my case, but you could round or do whatever you want with it if you don't want to truncate. I'm just choosing to truncate. Then we need a select statement, but we're going to do select integer because it's not two floats we're selecting between, it's an integer. A is going to be our multiplication, truncated result. B is going to be the actual hit stun frames from the hitbox data structure. And pick A is going to be our is install active again. Then we're going to take our return value and pass it into the hit stun frames. And you'll see this is what we were doing in this section right here. So now I'm going to clean this up. To do this, I'm going to make a function. So I'm going to make a new function, and I'm going to call it determine full damage. And we will take the nodes that we have here, our damage section, and we'll copy them. We'll paste them in here. And I want this determine full damage to take in a value, and that's going to be the damage from the hitbox. So we'll pass in float, call it damage amount. And then we're going to want to have a return value here. So we're going to add a new output parameter, and we will return a float. And this is going to be full damage. And so the return value of the select float is going to go into the return node. Then the damage amount is going to go into B. And something like that should do. Don't forget the float has to go into the multiply here as well. Almost forgot that one. Now we can actually delete the damage section here. And in the strike execution line, we want to call determine full damage. And we're going to pass in our damage amount. And then we're going to take the full damage and pass that into the damage amount and take damage. Now, I do have a lot of nodes going on here, so I am going to clean this up just a little bit. Just move this around a little bit so nothing is on top of each other. But I know this is a little crazy. Should do the trick. Now I say we do the same thing for the hit stun, so I'm going to make a new function plus function determine true hit stun. We're going to copy the logic from the event graph, paste it in here. Want to make sure determine true hit stun has an input parameter of integer, and it is going to be hit stun amount frames. Actually, let's call it hit stun frames because that's what it is. And let's make sure we add an output parameter that is going to be the true hit stun frames. We'll do the same thing as before. So the return value of the select will go into the return node. The hit stun frames has to go into the multiply here. And we'll need it to go into the select, of course, as well. So something like this will do. There we go. So now we can go back to the event graph, and we should call determine true hit stun as well. And it's a little bit long, so let's go ahead and move everything over. Then we will pass true hit stun frames into the hit stun frames on take damage. And it is cleaned up for the most part. So now we should be able to go into our game. And this should be a pretty obvious difference. So if I am to attack my opponent, you'll see it's not that much damage, it's 10%. Now let's enter our cheat for full super meter, and let's activate the install mode. We will attack again. You'll see there has been significantly more damage taken away from the character that was hit by the hitbox. Anyway guys, this is how you can implement install damage modifiers and hit stun modifiers in your game. There's a lot more to come with this. We're going to do visual and sound effects related to the install, as well as things like a timer. But I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope it helped you with modifiers for installs, power-ups, whatever your case may be. And if it did, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do, and I just really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership, Patreon members, Discord supporters. You guys are so incredible, and you keep these series alive, so thank you for all the love and support. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. I would be happy to help you out and get you sorted so you can keep working on your game. But anyway, guys, that's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.